Certainly an honor to be on this panel. I know we've done a lot of shows together, myself and Ambassador Bissett. I've done a few shows all on my own, so it's going to be difficult to try to compress what we normally try to expand to fill an evening into just 15 minutes. I'm going to change pace a little bit, and having certainly Joe McKenzie and Ambassador Bissett lay the groundwork, all the technical terms, all the context, allows me a bit more latitude to get into putting a little more personal face on just what they've been telling you about the Balkans. Is there any way we can dim the front lights so it's clear? I normally don't use photos and little tricks, but knowing that I had such an esteemed panel up here, I knew I had to go to some sort of extra trick to raise the bar. My own experience with the Balkans started back in '92. In fact, that's where I first met Joe McKenzie, way back in Croatia. I covered that as our soldiers were there, and as the others that were here, I mean, certainly spoke out when Canada decided to join in the bombing campaign in 1999. Felt strongly enough about it that I went into Belgrade during the bombing. I spent 28 days there, and also ended up in Kosovo before NATO troops arrived. So, having witnessed it and been listening to Jamie Shea, the NATO spokesperson, on the air, talking about what was happening, how they were destroying the Serbian military, they destroyed the Serbian morale. It was a shock to see soldiers like this coming out of Kosovo after the deal had been negotiated, and of course it didn't paint the same picture which the NATO accredited journalists that were sitting down and waiting to come in with the troops wanted to see. There was only about 100 and something of us that were NATO or Serbian accredited that were in Kosovo, as opposed to, I think it was 1,200 NATO journalists that came pouring in. All of them wanted to see the three things. One was the destruction of the Serbian army that was supposed to be there, the rape camps, and it was the mass graves that they were all looking for. Of course, in their scramble to find that, they were overlooking stories or in fact manufacturing stories. This particular picture was taken the very day that the NATO troops arrived. The main mosque in Pristina, the journalists were setting up at the Grand Hotel, and suddenly a huge pillar of smoke came from behind the main mosque. So everyone set up and started covering live how the Serbs had sent a final message to the Albanians by burning the main mosque, and they were filming it live here in Pristina. Myself and a Swedish guy walked up the hill and found out that the mosque wasn't on fire. The former Serbian brigade headquarters was, and it was the Albanians that had set it on fire. Of course, the NATO accredited journalists didn't think it necessary to change their story. It was also the story of all the Serbs that began fleeing in the wake of the revenge killings that were happening while the NATO troops were on the ground. People were fleeing in the hundreds of thousands, not the tens of thousands. And these are some of the families that were taking off. I actually left with the Serbs. I left with the refugees on the buses that we went through. And in Pristina at that time, there was gauntlets of Albanians, mobs of Albanians that would set up with NATO protection, setting up the intersections, and they would stone the vehicles and they would beat people, and if they could use logs to stop the car, they would pull them out and beat them in front of the NATO troops. The only time the NATO troops would intervene is if they were bringing the Serbs close to death. I remember getting back to Belgrade and telling that story to a CBC producer of what had happened, what I'd been through, and he said, well, all those people on your bus were probably war criminals. There's one of the passengers that was on my bus with me, and he was petrified as we got attacked by the Albanians. Other people, of course, fled with everything they had. After NATO journalists and NATO had declared victory, and everyone said the word was actually liberation, how you could liberate Kosovo from a state which was still recognized as its own sovereign territory was beyond me, but the journalists didn't care to question it. They all packed up. They came home. Never found the mass graves, never found the rape camp, and certainly the terms of the destruction of the Serbian army. In total, there was 13 tanks destroyed, and some of those were museum pieces that the Serbs kept putting out so NATO would attack them again and again. NATO journalists all took off, and of course that didn't end the violence. There was incursions into South Serbia. I kept covering that. There was all the disruption inside the internal Serbian politics, the removal of Milosevic, etc., Koštunica coming to power. Albanians then, under the same Učeka banner, moving into Macedonia. I mean, other journalists were covering this. They would give them fancy names like the Ona, the Ana, etc. But whenever you went into Macedonia, etc., all you ever saw painted on their bunkers was Učeka, and on their armbands was the same Učeka Kele armbands they always had. It wasn't until 2004, when everybody was watching Iraq, that another incident happened. Of course, the pogrom on 17th of March in Kosovo, when they ran rampant, and again, people began to question what the hell we had done. Why was this violence happening with 20,000 NATO troops there? Religious sites that were burnt, that was there. That was the one outside of what was that? Prizren. They didn't just burn the religious sites, of course, they burned Serbian houses. I think 800 houses were burnt, and of course they killed a number of Serbs as well. Something which couldn't be ignored, but it was a blip on the radar screen. Everybody managed to get the genie back in the bottle up until this year when we had the unilateral Declaration of Independence, which prior to, everyone from the Albanian leadership was saying that they are very much an inclusive society, that this is, the things that happened in the past are to be forgotten, and now it's all Albanians and non-Albanians can live in harmony. Well, of course, the day that they declared independence, that was the Albanian media. Obviously a provocation to any non-Albanian, particularly the Serbs living inside the enclaves there. Provoked a response, of course. The Serbs in Mitrovica went out and destroyed the customs point. We had more coverage of that than we did of anything else that was happening or any background events to that. And of course, that led to the events on this March 17th, which was in Mitrovica. It became sort of the battleground. That's the big enclave in the north where they had set up their own sort of puppet or shadow government, took over the city hall, I believe it was. And then, of course, on the same date, it was the anniversary of the previous pogrom. In came the NATO troops, which ended up in a big riot, which we saw coverage of, and 63 in NATO security forces and police were injured in that, along with a number of Serbs that were killed, etc. So it became very much the focal point. But then again, everyone else just sort of went back to sleep, and Canada quietly a month later agreed to recognize the independence of Kosovo.